What's up, everybody? How's it going? Today, I am joined by my good friend Rahul, who is an ex-staff software engineer at Facebook. He also has a YouTube channel. We did a video right about a year ago now. And today, we're going to be doing something a little bit interesting. You see, we've both worked at FAANG. We both think that FAANG is absolutely awesome. I loved my experience at Google and Facebook. He loved his at Facebook. He was also at Pinterest before. We've made many videos, really glorifying FAANG. However, today we wanted to take the contrarian viewpoint and talk about some of the things that aren't really known about FAANG or about, being an ex-FAANG engineer and effectively cast a more negative light on FAANG. Now, to be clear, we are still big proponents of FAANG. We still think working at FAANG is an amazing opportunity, but we're going to jump into 4 myths about FAANG or about being ex-FAANG that kind of cast a negative light on it. So with that, Rahul, why don't you start with the first myth?
Okay, perfect. So myth number 1 that I wanted to share is that people think that you can land any job you want after working at FAANG. And that is simply not true. So I actually did a bit of digging to illustrate what I'm talking about here. Amazon has 1.1 million employees, which is huge. And if you look at just the engineering headcount at Amazon, we're talking about at least somewhere between 30,000, 50,000, maybe even more at this point, but 30,000 engineers at least who work at Amazon. If you consider Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, all these companies, we're talking about literally hundreds of thousands, almost up to 1 million software engineers who work at these mega big tech companies. And so my point in saying all that is that it's actually not that prestigious, or it's not that rare to be a software engineer at one of these big tech companies. And so the consequence of that is that even if you work at FAANG for 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it might be, you will still have to go through the ringer, if you will, when you leave and try and get another job. And so don't expect for things to be so much easier just because you have Google on your resume. You will still have to prepare for algorithmic interviews. You will still have to work hard at trying to show that you know what you're talking about. And only then do you get those job offers. And so I have certainly experienced that at Pinterest and Facebook, where I've gone out and interviewed, and I've actually failed interviews, even having that brand name on my resume. So that's like the big myth that I want to dispel, is that you just will get any job you want after working at FAANG.
And basically, you're just not that unique. That's what it kind of comes down to. But this brings me to my first myth, which is that some people think that they will have this gigantic marketing value once they become, ex-FAANG engineers. It's almost a meme at this point. But the truth is that for most people who work at FAANG and then leave, they're actually not going to be able to leverage that marketing value of being an ex-FAANG engineer. It might help them land like one interview, like their next interview, or whatever interviews they do, plural, right after that FAANG job. But unless they end up being in a very special position, like for example me, who happens to have a company, Algo Expert, that precisely helps software engineers prepare for interviews at FAANG companies. By the way, if you're a software engineer preparing for your technical interviews, then go check out Algo Expert. Go to algoexpert.io and use the promo code CLEM, CLAM, for a discount on the platform. But so unless you're in that very specialized and unique position that I'm in, where I have admittedly been really able to leverage that ex-Google, ex-Facebook brand name, then you're not necessarily going to be able to do that. As an example, let's say you leave Google and you go make like a B2B company that sells, I don't know, employee management software to other companies. Going in a sales meeting with another company to buy your product and telling them, I used to work at Google, isn't going to do anything. Like, it's just not going to be relevant. So that's my myth. Like, the marketing value isn't necessarily as amazing as it sounds.
I'll segue that into my second myth, which is that in the same way that you shouldn't expect to have unlimited brand value just by working at FAANG, you also shouldn't expect to have unlimited money after working at FAANG. I think a common myth that people assume is that, after you work at FAANG, you're just going to be so rich, you can just retire, you can do whatever you want. And let me caveat by saying, hey, you do get really well paid working at FAANG. You're going to have a great compensation, stock, base salary, and bonus, and that's going to be great. And compared to most Americans, it's going to be a really amazing salary. But I still don't think it's entirely true that you can just, have FU money and never work again. And what I mean is that if you're a mid-level engineer, like a L4, L5, maybe even L6 engineer, you will not make enough to basically just quit forever and never have to work again. And what I mean is that, especially if you work in a high cost of living area, like Bay Area, which is where I am, then houses are going to be super expensive. And what I have found very frequently is that there's a lot of lifestyle creep. And so a lot of my coworkers at Facebook, they used to have to spend literally $20,000, $25,000 every month for mortgage, childcare, buying that new car. And so when you're spending $250,000 a year post-tax, then you need to have that level of income in order to support your lifestyle. And what that means is that you can't very easily just quit your job without a lot of stress, or you can't even really go to a smaller startup which doesn't have liquid stock, right? Because you are really reliant on that TC, that total compensation, to support your lifestyle. So that's like the big myth that I want to talk about, which is that you're not going to become hugely wealthy just by working at FAANG for a couple of years.
Yeah, the only two caveats that I'll give there are that, and both Rahul and I have made videos about this in the past, you are still likely at an advantage if you work at a FAANG company in a high cost of living area, for example, compared to working, a very, middle level job, even like outside of software engineering in a low cost of living area, because you'll still be able to save more money ultimately. And also, like Rahul pointed out, like you're still going to be like in the top 1%, in America, or top 2%, whatever the number is, by working at FAANG. So like, we're not trying to say that you're going to be poor by working at FAANG. Absolutely not. But yes, you're not going to be like rich by working 2 years at FAANG, especially now that like the stocks have appreciated so much that like, there's only so much more that they can appreciate exponentially, in the near term future. But this brings me to my final myth, which is that ultimately not every single FAANG engineer is amazing at coding. Like, there is this myth that everybody who works at FAANG is like a 10x engineer and will help, boost the productivity of your engineering team at your startup or company, tenfold. Not necessarily true. Ultimately, like Rahul said in his first point, there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who work at FAANG, software engineers who work at FAANG, who have worked at FAANG. So naturally, just by the law of statistics, there will be some that will be in the bottom 10% and who will just not be as good as others, or just not great at coding, or perhaps they'll have only worked in a very niche code base in FAANG with internal tools that are specific to their company. And so, yeah, they just won't be the best coders. Just something to keep in mind.
The other reason why this is a myth, I think, is that it kind of is pigeonholing software engineers into one dimension, which is coding. And that's just not true. Especially at these big tech companies, a lot of the value of a software engineer is not just through writing code. And I think we've talked about this too, right, Clement? It's like a lot of the value is getting alignment, doing code review, figuring out how to communicate effectively with a large group of people. And so, again, not everyone at FAANG is a superstar at coding, but they might have value in other ways. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is that, to your point, like not everyone is a 10x engineer. I think that's true. The kind of counterpoint or the caveat I'll add is that there do exist 10x engineers at FAANG. And especially at FAANG, you do guarantee you're going to have these amazing, amazing coders who just get things done in a way that you had never thought about or imagined. And I kind of think of it like college. The reason you go to college is you're going to interact with people who are really incredible and talented, and you're going to be able to learn from them. And so in the same way, a lot of the value of FAANG, I think, is that you're at least able to come into contact with these 10x or even 100x engineers. And yeah, not everyone is going to be a 10x engineer, but when you have that rare person on your team or adjacent team, you're going to have a ton of ability to learn from them. And I'll just quickly mention here also that we talked about how there's a lot of things that are not coding related in software engineering. So I actually have an app designed for helping you manage all the non-technical parts of your software engineering career. So things like, how do you have an effective one-on-one? How do you run meetings effectively? How do you build consensus? And so if you're interested in that, maybe Clement, I can ask you to leave a link for that in the description.
Yeah, definitely. And totally agree with everything that you said. Ultimately, like, you will have a higher likelihood of being in contact with like a 10x engineer if you work at FAANG, or, if there's an ex-FAANG engineer, there's a likelihood that they might be a 10x engineer, but not everyone will be. But so on that note, those are the myths that we had for you today. I do want to reemphasize the fact that ultimately we still think that working at a FAANG company is an amazing opportunity. There are so many positives that definitely outweigh the negatives. These aren't even explicit negatives. They're more just like little things that bring you down to earth or down to reality. And yeah, we filmed another video on Rahul's channel about technical interview prep and specifically mistakes to avoid, kind of like these unique mistakes that we've identified that you should avoid. Go check it out. Go show Rahul some love. I'll put the link in the description and in the comments below. And with that, don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter if you enjoy short form written content, Instagram if you like pictures, and I will see you in the next video.